Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jovi Krieger, she, they pronouns, and today I'm presenting Resistance and Renovation, the recent feminist movements in Latin America. This is a research collaboration between three scholars, Gabriella Kyrillos, myself, and Nicolli Gautério. And this project is basically headed by Gabriella Kyrillos, who is a professor at the University of Rio Grande in the south of Brazil. I met Gabriella when I was in my undergrads. She was doing her doctoral studies, and we decided to collaborate on one of her projects, one of her research groups, Decolonization in International Relations, and she is currently developing a research project on theoretical mapping of intersectionality. So it's a very ambitious project mapping and registering theories regarding intersectionality, but with a specific focus on how intersectionality was received by Latin American movements. And my role, myself and Nicolli, we joined this project doing something that's going to support Gabriella's research project. We propose to identify important feminist movements in Latin America, movements that mark the history of protests in the territory, assess their demands and achievements, and analyze their current activities. So our research objective is to examine the transformation of feminist movements in Latin America in the past 10 years, with a specific focus on their political responses and readaptation to the governmental context and their strategies of action. This is an overview of what we are planning to do. So this is an ongoing project. Our first step was the planning stage, in which we developed a research design. We did a literature review. We selected our theoretical foundation. And we are currently working on the second stage, evaluating and analyzing the movement Menos from Argentina. The Argentina movement is very symbolic in the region. It's one of the most popular demonstration, one of the most important movements in terms of feminism in South America and Latin America in general. The Menos, as I'm going to present later, their main demands was the end of gender violence and the legalization of abortion, interruption of pregnancy. We are also planning to study 3 other nations and their respective feminist movements. So the next step is to study Brazil, especially the feminist movement around the resistance to the presidential impeachment of Dilma Rousseff in 2016. The impeachment was not only a political process, there was also cultural elements involved and a lot of gender violence, discursive violence. Also, we are planning to evaluate how the feminist movement reacted against Bolsonaro's election and government from 2018 to 2022. The next step is to study Chile. Chile had a very strong connection with the Argentinian movement, and the nuances, the particularities of Chile feminist movement is the student protest. Chile had different waves of student protests. Many of them were, the protagonists were women, and the feminist movement followed the student protest. And another important particularity of Chile is the feminist reaction to gender and anti-LGBT violence. And finally, we also identify Mexico as an important society, and an important example in feminist movement, especially from 2016, 2017, when protests against sexual violence arose, and that resulted in the recent election of President Sheinbaum last year. Sheinbaum was the mayor of Mexico City, and she was very active during this protests and social movements against sexual violence. Just a quick side note, I just wanted to mention that last year I had the great opportunity to go to Chile and see the visual exposition Revueltas Gráficas, Multitudes for Changing Lives. It's a very interesting art exposition. I think it communicates a lot with what we're doing in this festival, but I won't have, this is not the topic that I'm presenting about, so just some quick references. This is the boring part of my presentation. I'm going to talk about the theory, the theoretical foundations of our project, but I'm going to try to make it brief. So we begin discussing the feminist movement in connection to the ideas of coloniality of gender. There's an important, a seminal article published by Peruvian sociologist Aníbal Quijano in the year 1992, in which Quijano defends that coloniality is a matrix. Coloniality is an octopus with multiple tentacles going in different directions. He's basically saying that coloniality operates over different axes of human existence, and he listed four main directions, four main areas of control of colonialism: the economy, authority, knowledge, and what's most important for this presentation, control over reproduction. So what Quijano is arguing is that the control over property, family structure, and education were part of colonialism as a way of upholding capitalism in the colonial context. Another important contribution is by Argentinian political scientist Walter Mignolo, who drew on Quijano. And Mignolo argued that coloniality has its roots on Eurocentric philosophy, either religious or secular. And Mignolo argued that the matrix of coloniality is a complementary and interconnected multitude of axes. So all the axes that you see here, they are mutually constitutive and supportive of one another. One of the main contributions that we're using in our project is Maria Lugones' work from 2008, in which Lugoni criticized Quijano's proposition, saying that his theory about colonial control of reproduction is not sufficient to explain the coloniality of gender. Lugones proposes to look at gender identity, gender performance or performativity, affect and sexuality, gender norms, and gender roles beyond the economic perspective, beyond the control of gender being based or having the purpose of upholding capitalism. According to Lugones, the imposition of Eurocentric gender norms were based on a few different dimensions. So heteronormativity, sexuality seen as sinful, gender binarism and cisnormativity, monogamy, and the marriage being sacred and inseparable. Much of that is based on Christian and Eurocentric normativity of the time. That imposition of Eurocentric values resulted in the repression of gender systems of racialized others or racialized societies, such as indigenous societies, African diasporic communities, and non-white immigrant communities. In fact, Lugones argued that there was quite a rich diversity of gender systems and norms of sexuality in indigenous Latin America that were heavily repressed by colonialism. So the feminist struggles in Latin America, we have the feminist movement acted throughout multiple historical eras, multiple fronts of battle, multiple forms of organizations. and demands. The history is very long. There has been feminist resistance since time immemorial, indigenous resistance to colonialism, black women resisting slavery or demanding abolition of slavery, campesinos movements fighting for lands, women protesting against authoritarian and dictatorial regimes, protests against neoliberalism. The list is long. But overall, one of the important realizations, or one important comprehension of Latin American feminist movement is that the state is insufficient, and maybe it is, there's an impossibility for the state to provide adequate solutions for the demands of women and other non-dominant gender identities. And that resulted in the creation of community-based networks of aid, support, and solidarity, so politics beyond the state. Also, with the influence of global trends in feminist movements internationally, postmodernist, feminist theory, and queer theory, the feminist movement in Latin America expanded their categories, the category of gender. So the feminist movement is not restricted to women. It also includes non-binary people, other non-dominant identities of gender. Also, the feminist movement recognized the struggle against racism as one important step in the international struggle, and especially internal to feminist movements. So the demands of white, middle-class, cisgender women was not, for a long time, it dominated feminist movement. After the 1980s, 1990s, that changed. So feminist movements in Latin America today are much more intersectional. Now I would like to discuss the movement Ni Una Menos from Argentina. The movement began in 2015 after the femicide of a 14-year-old woman, Chiara Paz, in Buenos Aires. It actually followed many other cases of femicide, but the case of Chiara Paz was the trigger that ignited the movement. So a group of artists, journalists, and academics formed the grassroots collective #Ni Una Menos, which means no one woman less. And the main mobilization was on social media, Facebook and Twitter at the time. It expanded to Instagram, TikTok, and they're basically in all social medias today. The Ni Una Menos organized rallies annually, always on June 3rd. In 2016, so just 1 year after the creation of the movement, after the murder of 16-year-old Lucia Perez, the Ni Una Menos organized the first mass women's strike, in which they invited women to pause their work and study for 1 hour in October 2016. The Ni Una Menos has a strong digital presence, strong digital communication, connection with feminist movements worldwide, and it has been inspiring similar collectives, similar movements in Latin America. There's a Ni Una Menos chapter in Peru, which is also something that we're considering to include in our analysis. And as I'm going to discuss later, some of the achievements and victories of the Ni Una Menos Argentina inspired the movement in other nations like Mexico. Oh yes, and the digital presence of Ni Una Menos is also something that we would like to explore in more details, their strategy of action, communication, and we identified that the digital communication for Ni Una Menos has 2 layers. One that's more public is the way that the movement communicates with the general population, share information about rallies, about movements. And there's another more internal communication that utilize more cryptographic communication using apps that cannot be traced to avoid surveillance and repression. So apps like Signal, sometimes Telegram, to avoid surveillance. So one of the first achievements of Ni Una Menos happened just a few months after the first rally. the Ni Una Menos forced the president, Mauricio Macri, who was elected by a party called PRO, Conservative and Neoliberal Party. The collective forced Macri to create institutions for gathering information and responding to gender-based violence. So 3 important institutions. The most important of them is the Ministry for Women, Gender, and Diversity. And more than just demanding criminalization and punishment, Ni Una Menos has been one of the most interesting consequences of Ni Una Menos is naming gender violence, gathering information to make it possible to respond. So it caused a significant cultural shift in Argentinian society and the way that Argentinians treat women and the feminist movement. So in 2018, the Ni Una Menos movement began focusing on a different demand, the struggle for legalization of abortion. So Latin America is a very patriarchal and somehow machist territory. And most of the, until 2018, there was only one country, one nation that had legalized abortion, Uruguay. But Uruguay has always been an outlier in terms of politics. Uruguay is the most progressive society in Latin America. So in 2018, the Ni Una Menos adopted slogans like legal, safe, and free abortion for all. Rich women can abort while poor women die, so denouncing the discrepancy in terms of class in which rich women could access abortive practices, abortive clinics, while poor women had to rely on unsanitary clinics. Another important slogan is neither dead nor in prison. So denouncing that women who resorted to abortion risk to be criminalized and incarcerated. The visual symbol for the struggle for the legalization of abortion are the green pañuelos or bandanas. They can be worn as bandanas or handkerchiefs, and the symbol of the green pañuelos resulted in the naming of the movement as the Green Tide. So that was an important symbolic element in the struggle for legalization of abortion in Argentina. The movement was successful. In 2020, the Congress passed the law 27610, access to voluntary interruption of pregnancy, allowing abortive procedures for up to 14 weeks of pregnancy. 1 year later, inspired by the Ni Una Menos, the Mexican government also approved a law that legalized abortion. However, not everything is good news. The election of Javier Milei in 2023 represents a threat to the rights of women. Here I took the artistic liberty of placing his picture upside down in a reference to another fascist leader. So in an interview, Milei stated that feminists are brainwashed by homicidal policy and vowed to overturn the abortion law. And here the idea of being brainwashed or being influenced by external influences reminds me yesterday's presentation. Aidan mentioned about how conservative politicians use the idea of rationality and intellectual influence as a way to marginalize or to dislegitimize social movements. One of the first policies of Javier Milei after his inauguration was the elimination of the Ministry of Women, Gender, and Diversity, a very symbolic measure because that was one of the first victories of the Ni Una Menos. And in January, or I think it was early February, in the Davos Economic Forum, Milei opposed the legal category of femicide, saying that with that legal category, women's lives are worth more than men's lives. And that's part of what he called his anti-woke agenda. So following the trend of other far-right conservative politicians worldwide. Milei also implemented what the media called anti-protest protocols, allowing the arrest of picketing and obstructing traffic as a clear way of sending a message to those who engage in social movements and protests. Now, wrapping up the case of Argentina, the new Menos movement faced challenges and is still engaged in resistance. New Menos resisted symbolically during the 2023 elections by engaging in a dispute of narratives, and many scholars are saying that the participation of feminist movements prevented a landslide victory of the right wing of Milei. In fact, the president who was running for re-election, Alberto Fernandez, was quite unpopular. He had low chances of winning, but in the final election, the results were really close between Fernandez and Milei. So the rise of conservative and far-right political ethos in Argentina threatens the recent achievements of feminist and popular movements. And that shows that legal victories, legal achievements are unstable. To paraphrase Angela Davis, freedom is a constant struggle, and our victories, our achievements are always risking to be eliminated. And that shows also the new Menos is currently facing challenges for re-articulation and mobilization, part because of this politics of fear that Javier Milei is resorting to. So the repression against protests, his anti-woke agenda, and also that's something that we would like to explore in more details. Apparently, COVID had an impact in terms of articulation in New Menos and other feminist movements in Latin America. But that's yet to be researched. So future directions for our project is to continue our analysis of feminist movements in other societies. As I mentioned, we would like to do some similar research in Brazil, Chile, and Mexico. So we are gathering data, we are doing a literature review, collecting relevant articles and news. We would like to understand the connections and mutual influence between New Menos and other feminist movements worldwide, maybe mapping their common strategies of action, which according to our hypothesis is the use of social network and digital communication for mobilization. So communication and mobilization, so similar strategies between movements. We also want to explore how feminist movements responded to conservative and far-right politics, which is the case of Argentina, and how they are responding to progressive governments, which is the current case of Brazil, Chile, and Mexico. So how the feminist movement continues to operate and mobilize under governments that allegedly are supportive. There's also the possibility of expanding the list of countries that we're analyzing. As I mentioned, Peru is an interesting case, and more, we would like some representation of Central America as well. The final direction that we would like to explore is mapping the international network of support, especially from big names in feminist movements. So Nancy Fraser, Angela Davis, Judith Butler, just to name a few, are scholars who have engaged with the leaderships of New Menos and other feminist movements in Latin America, who demonstrated their support, and who have been supportive in terms of theorizing about feminist movements in present politics. Also Madonna is in that list. So our goal Our overall goal is to document, sharing, and strengthening feminist networks by sharing information or sharing strategies of action, connecting communities, and amplifying collective resistance. Just a quick comment about the picture that you see here. That was a rally on March 8th in Argentina last year, so this picture has exactly 1 year of existence. And you can see here a sign that says in Spanish, take away the chainsaw from our rights, the chainsaw being the symbol of Javier Milei, who's claiming to, whose slogan is that he's using a chainsaw to cut governmental funding for social programs. Here are some of the references that we are using, some that I mentioned in the presentations, others that I didn't. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much.
The last thing I just sort of really wanted to say, I've been, I programmed these panels, both this panel and the one that's coming up after this. I was very happy to program this on International Women's Day for one thing, and these two talks, I was really happy to put them together, and I'm hoping we'll have a nice discussion about all of the things that you folks have raised, and then to think about this in terms of the cultures of protest as we go forward. And then the next panel coming up introduces a number of other dimensions of how to think about the relationship, particularly about protests and movements that both of the two papers together kind of put together. That cultures of protest is one of the things that comes in between movements and protest that both need that cultures of different kinds, cultural production of all different kinds, for both of these things to happen in the world at all, in that kind of regard, right? So with that, I think, Elaine, you're almost ready to
just
show us the video.
Just and then forward. Yeah, so this is actually so this album, it included like a piece of their work. It's called An Alternative Silence. And they were mentioning, like oppression that Palestinians and their allies are witnessing worldwide. And I feel this is, alternative silence is a great connection with students and their work. Because they have their own way to, to fight against what institutions, what even states, countries has been doing against Palestinians and their allies. And their work very connected to indigenous people, communities worldwide, in Palestine, in South America, and so on. So this is the main video that I want to play. They are my favorite, actually, like a group in doing this kind of work.
ليصبح حاضرنا ماضيا مثلنا. سنمضي إلى حتفنا. أولا سندافع عن شجر نرتديه، وعن جرس الليل، عن قمر فوق أكواخنا نشتهي، وعن طيش غزلاننا سندافع، عن طير فخارنا سندافع، وعن ريشنا في جناح الأغاني الأخيرة. عما قليل تقيمون علمكم فوق عالمنا، من مقابرنا تفتحون الطريق إلى القمر الاصطناعي. هذا زمان الصناعات، هذا زمان المعاد. من قطعة الفحم تبزغ وموتى وبلدوزرات وموتى ومستشفيات وموتى وشاشات رادارة ترصد موتى يعيشون بعد الممات وموتى يربون وحش الحضارات موتى وموتى يموتون كي يحملوا الأرض فوق الرفات. إلى أين يا سيد البيض تأخذ شعبي وشعبك؟
Beautiful. All right, well, I have lots of questions and things that are buzzing around in my head, but let's open this all up to everybody, to your thoughts, questions, observations.
Lights up.
Lights up? Oh, lights up. Go ahead.
Niuna Menos, not one less woman, right? Is more of a movement, social movement, and you were talking about social non-movements, and right? Because across Latin America, it's a protest movement, women against to combat gender-based violence. The agenda is pretty centralized, and the chapters kind of pop up almost spontaneously. So they're not movement that way, the way they pop up in various countries, but yet their agenda is pretty related. And the non-movements of, the social non-movements of Bayat, what you talked about, this fragmented, kind of no central organizational structure, which what he's talking about, and he was talking specifically about the student movement in Iran, the green movement in Iran, which he also describes as non-movement, because various student groups popped up at various times within Iran, right? So they don't have any centralized, they takes into account the complexity, the specification. He calls them passive networks of street politics, the art of presence, right? Talk to each other about this. Movements, non-movements, social movements, social non-movement. Please talk to me about this. It's fascinating.
Would you like to start?
It's just I would like to say that, like, you know, when I started reading about, like, especially Asif Bayat and his work, and it started actually in 2018, like first time, and that time I watched an interview of him. He was interviewed by the Arab Center to talk about Arab Spring.
Arab Spring, yeah.
And he was amazing, like the way that he put all of these things on the table. And because Arab Spring also was led by students, right? And he was talking about like how in a specific environment, and when you cannot act in a way that we used to see and we used to read from Charles Tilly and Sidney Tarrow. These are prestigious and sophisticated theories about social movements. It actually, since that time, I was thinking a lot about it. But when I came here, I felt there's something overlap, right? Because of, I claim that some, if not the majority of the universities here, they practice the idea of authoritarian, repressive environment that we used to live in the Middle East. Like, and I reflect on one thing, maybe some of my fellows here, like here the example. Like when the UFA encampment happened, my father actually, like I had a phone call with him, and he was waiting on the checkpoint, and the University of Alberta popped up on the radio, right? And he was asking like, hey, like this is happening at UFA, like are you okay, are you? And he started asking me questions. Exactly the same questions that he used to ask when I used to come back from my university in Nablus in the West Bank to home when I go through a checkpoint. Like, you know, like same, and I started saying, okay, I'm here in Canada, I'm not in the West Bank, so what's the main thing that is different, right? I'm just like, the name is different, but I feel the same, he feels the same, right? So this is why, like, I felt this is almost same environment for someone like me. I am seeing the environment from the outside, And that's why I feel social non-movement is best fit. Maybe I have not phrased my words well. I'm not saying that these theories are not good. They are very rich and very important. But I felt when I was reading about all of these theories, I felt there's gap in all of them that couldn't give me what I want to understand student movement or student activism in Western University. Also, like activism itself, I feel sometimes it's a problematic, right? Like when you say activism, and I feel it aligns with Asif Bayat's idea that this is privilege to act in a specific time, specific place, because you have specific resources. And like I was also, like in one of my classes, I asked my political science classmates, like how do we understand action? Why we find 2 or 3 students, like they act, but the rest don't act. They believe in what these 2 or 3 students doing, but they don't act. And that's why I feel it's not like activism itself is not about activism, it's about something else. And I found it in Payat and other people in the Iranian revolution. It's very rich revolution, there's many lessons. And Ali Shariati was talking about, like enlightened souls, and the idea of how the person could be enlightened to do ethical work, and how much this could like give the energy for actors to do this kind of work. So this is my main thing about student movements. I feel they are strong to explain what's happening in Palestine now. They are strong to explain what's happening in universities now in the West. And it's happening, they are strong to explain why other Arab nations don't speak against what's going on, right? They are strong, like these ideas by Bayat, just like as a one package, like you find a lot of things to take from and to build on. Because I feel his work is brand new in the West. No one, almost, like I don't see anyone is citing his work in student movements or student non-movements. So this is another answer to why, for example, I'm talking about student non-movements. Yeah.
Yes, I think that every strategy of action has potentials, have advantages and setbacks. The decision of the new Menos in Argentina was indeed to centralize, to unify the demands, and to actually build a structure of leadership, of dissemination, and that was important to achieve some victories, such as the creation of public institutions to gather information about violence against women, and also the legal victory for the legalization of abortion. But I believe that as Gabriella, Nicolli, and I advance the research, we're going to find some differences between Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Mexico. My impression as a Brazilian student is that, at least in Brazil, the feminist movement is decentralized. There are different local organizations that are in constant adaptation and changing their demands, their practices, their strategies of action. And again, that has potential in some aspect, but also some setbacks. So I think that there's no clear, there's not one, it doesn't mean that there's one strategy that's better than the other. They can achieve different victories. Those are just 2 different strategies of action. Both are important.
Other thoughts, questions? Yes.
So you talked about a revolution without revolutionaries. I thought that was very interesting. In your characterization of the student movement as not asking for revolution, but also not asking for reform. So I'm guessing, I'm just wondering, like, what do you think they're asking for?
That's a good question. It's actually, like Bayat said, like, and revolution as a concept is not for Bayat like from the beginning. It was for another scholar, and I apologize that I forget his name, but he was building on social movements in Eastern Europe and the way that they seek change to do, like to ask authorities to do reform. So they negotiated actually authorities and elites, and that's why change, it started from the bottom, but it was up bottom, because it's reform, like elites changed some policies and they changed some, like they gave some good things in the system, and okay, now we are good to go, right? And revolutions, it's something radical. You change something from the, like, collectively, like, and totally. But Bayat said, and this is again from the Arab Spring lessons, he said, this is a revolution without revolutionaries. There is no specific revolution here, but also it's not a reform, it's a revolution because of two things. First, sometimes in these cases, people or actors don't like to negotiate, and this is happening. Right. And also, they want to see change and they want to see big change, but they are not expecting this change to happen now. It's not like revolution, for example, like the student revolution in Bangladesh,
Okay.
in Bangladesh,
Yeah.
right? The student revolution in Bangladesh, like, just because most of us, I have not followed like what happened, but in 2-3 days I hear that they took down like everything and they run the government, right? So I think like here in the case of student movements in the West, it's different. I don't think they want to do the same. They don't want to run the country. They don't want to run the university. They want change, but this change, it needs time. And that's why I highlighted when I studied the social movement, student movement or no movement, I was talking about it's important at this time. We all know that institutions, they practice oppression and repression against actors, but I think in my opinion, it's more important to understand internal dynamics because you can provide maybe some, I don't want to say recommendations, but maybe some good points that they can be beneficial for students themselves, like what to do and when to do things, because these are important in light of understanding visibility and how universities, institutions look at visibility in a specific time. And also building on Asif Bayat, like, to be visible and to be confrontational, it's not a goal for the movement or the non-movement itself. It's a tactic that should be used in the right time, right? So maybe I'm not sure if this answers your question, but these, like all of these points around like the idea of revolution, so no negotiation, but also they want big change, but it's not immediate change. Yeah, I think all of the students realize, I spoke to students in the US and in Canada, I think all of them realize that this change is not happening after 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My initial reaction is, I guess, the distinction between movement and non-movement, reform, revolution, revolution, a descriptive distinction or a prescriptive one. And by that I'm also then wondering about, what is about also the objective, the thing that you're struggling to change, right? Like, and maybe it matters that the student movement in North America it would look different if it was in Israel and Palestine, right? Maybe the revolution and reform would be a different question. So I'm thinking about the dispersal of power means that you can't taking the board of governors is not going to change it, right? So I'm wondering about how the sort of kinds of movements that emerge are also reflecting like a different position in relation to this struggle or something like that. And then I also am thinking about, is the non-movement a problem? Like I'm thinking now, I mentioned Sartre yesterday, which I probably should never mention Sartre. But he had this idea that his problem was that people act collectively, but they don't act collectively on the basis of self-determination. So it's an idea of like collective action without collective actors. And his question is, how do we get out of this like state of like, of habit or something like that, that reproduces the injustice of the world. And for him, it was this question about how do we move from that space to something more active and involved. And that's what I'm thinking about, going back to that prescription description idea of like, is there a need to move from a non-movement to a movement? Or yeah, anyways, I'll stop talking.
So the answer of description, prescription, I think both. I think some, like Bayatsi was trying to describe what's happening, but also I think he argued for this idea that yes, non-movement is the solution to act in these specific contexts, and that's why like his maybe conclusions. He took these conclusions and he went to apply them on like different countries in the Arab Spring. But also, interestingly enough, that he used to talk about this even way before the Arab Spring. I think revolution without revolutionaries, he started talking about this way before the Arab Spring. So I'm not saying that actors did read his work and went to apply. What did he read? But I think because understanding the context itself and the constraints in that context, that's why I see what did he write is also a perspective for actors, like to do specific things in specific places, specific times. I'm also like sometimes like I don't want to like to keep talking about non-movement as something fragmented, just to not export that kind of image that fragmented is something not, like sophisticated and
Weaker.
good and
Weaker.
weaker, because they are not weaker in his context, and in these contexts they are not weaker, they are stronger. And again, that's why maybe it's not just description, is prescription.
Yeah, I think that was a really pertinent question, and it made me think about something that you mentioned before, the decision of being confrontational or not, and also using, what is the term that you use, whether there's chances, high chances or low chances? Opportunities, yes.
Yeah.
That all influences whether a movement will decide to act in a more structured way, as like an organized, unified movement, or as this network of fragmented centers. And again, it's different strategies of actions, potentials and setbacks for each. I think that ideally, it's good for social movements to act in both directions. I think there's good potential if social movements are mobilizing in a more organized way to have actors who can clearly state the demands and pressure authorities, pressure those in positions of power, but also the fragmented, decentralized strategy is really, really important and has achieved victories in different historical contexts and societies.
Yeah.
Feminist revolutions speak in terms of feminist movements, speak in terms of waves, right? Third wave, second wave, fourth wave. We build on, or even if it's a critique of the previous wave, we don't vacate the previous wave. But other sort of revolutionary movements, more general ones, in this case the student movement, tend to follow the logic of failed revolution, what's his name? Peter Starr? Is that him? The logic of failed revolution after May 68, he's talking about France particularly, where revolutionary movements after the revolution kind of worry about a return to the past, right? So it's a logic, the revolution always follows the logic of failed revolution. That's the idea. So we tend to vacate the previous movements. Whereas, for example, maybe other protest movements should learn from the feminist movement and maybe think in terms of waves rather, right? Because, you know, there's a lot of important student movements historically, the ones in Nazi Germany, the Rose, what's it called? The Greensboro sit-in, Kent State, you know, various things, Tiananmen Square, obviously, and look at how these movements kind of set the ground for us, you know, even within the last 20, 25 years, like, you know, we're thinking, I'm pointing at Soraya, our generation of protesters, you know, I was at the 1997 UBC pepper spray incident of standing right behind Terry Malofsky. We're the people who hung the Tibetan flag at the UBC campus. Anyway, we used to talk in terms of coalitional politics, right? Even if it was not specifically feminist, it's a student uprising, a student protest. But it doesn't seem, the term is not used as much. We talk more about solidarity today, but not so much coalitional politics in protest, right? Whereas the feminists, and I'm generalizing here, still talk in terms of coalitional and intersectionality, right? So perhaps, you know, the other movements ought to learn from the feminist movement. I'm just thinking about how different they are in approaches.
Can I just add one quick comment about the waves that was really striking? Within a week of the student encampment being cleared by the police, I think her name was Brenda Luck, I believe. Brenda Luck was someone who was based in Edmonton during the anti-apartheid movement. And she was organizing on campus to stop the selling of particular products that are made in South Africa. She gets tapped by, I can't remember which South African anti-apartheid group taps her, and I think it was her partner at the time, to write a book of the role of youth. And then it was either a week before or a week after, the South African government gave her a medal for recognizing her contributions to the anti-apartheid struggle. And I just thought it was remarkable that this was literally a week within that encampment movement. And anyways, that's like the wave.
Absolutely.
I agree with your statement. I think it's important to learn from previous experience from different movements, but there's also one element that complicates this position, which is the interconnection between movements. Feminist movements, at least in my experience in Brazil, the feminist movement in Brazil is connected to the student movements. Some of the leaderships of feminist movements have been leaderships of student movements, union movements, socialist movements, movements for land. So leaderships are connected. Sometimes leaderships, the leaders are the same person who are in multiple movements. That can definitely help the idea of coalition, but also like sometimes there's no boundaries between different movements. So it's an interesting complexity.
They coalesce together.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
A lot of times they're more successful when there's more groups demonstrating.
You know, like one more point that I wanted to add to this, if I can. Like, you know, in comparative politics, sometimes you are allowed to make concepts travel, right? Like to take them from the Middle East and to apply them here in Edmonton. And like when I started writing, I don't know why, like I couldn't, I'm struggling to go outside of, you know, like the borders that, or they're not borders, but the style that I used to think in Palestine. And especially when it comes to the liberation movement itself as a collective movement. And there, you know, like feminist movement and other movements, you don't see them, you know, you don't see this is feminist movement, this is, you know, like another movement, like all of them, they are acting under the same umbrella. And I feel there's no wave, there's just one wave. It's connected, but it could sometimes like be very visible and sometimes be invisible. And this is also somehow like connected to what Bayat is saying, that it's not about like when to act, it's about when to make your action visible or invisible. So, but the idea of waves, actually, it's interesting. And I have not like thought about it in a way that this should be maybe here and see like what the additional thing could provide to my work.
But the wave validates and sometimes fractures revolutionary circles and revolutionary
Fractures,
causes.
yeah.
Sometimes fractures
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Even
yeah.
the third wave feminists critique the second wave for being white feminist, white middle class feminist, right? Then, you know, racial critique, right? Then the fourth wave queered the third wave, right? The queering of the, so we're in the fourth wave still? No, wait, somebody said we're in the fifth wave with the kids from Florida, the kids that, after the shooting at the school. What's her name? Gonzalez. The Florida school shooting, they called it the fifth wave of young feminists.
Oh, yes.
The Gen Zs.
Yeah.
We're having a great discussion, but I'm going to play harsh timekeeper because with 4 speakers, I think, if I'm right. So I want us to all thank and applaud these
Thank you.
wonderful speakers. And these themes will resonate, so I'm sure we'll come back to this discussion.